Hello everyone and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host Nathan Orenstein, and today I'm going to be reviewing Speak No Evil. Speak No Evil is written and directed by James Watkins and stars James McAvoy, Mackenzie Davis, Scoot McNairy, and Aisling Franciosi. After meeting each other on an Italian vacation, a mild-mannered family is invited to stay the weekend in the English countryside by a more free-spirited and outgoing family. The guest family quickly becomes fed up with the inappropriate behavior from their hosts, but find themselves unable to leave. Speak No Evil is a remake of the 2022 Danish film of the same name. Right off the bat, I want to say that I have seen the original Speak No Evil, but I'm going to assume that you haven't, and I'm going to try to approach this review as someone who hasn't either. That being said, I will be providing some spoiler-free notes of comparison throughout if you have seen the original and are curious how this stacks up. Regardless, I had low expectations for this thing. English language horror remakes have a bad reputation for a reason, and more specifically, the Dutch versus Danish language difference of the original actually played into the story really well, and we would be losing that here. Well, in a stunning upset, the Speak No Evil remake is just as good as the original in my opinion, and it's just a really solid horror film overall. So the idea here is that this guest family lets this host family continue to do more and more inappropriate things without making much of a fuss because, one, they're the guests, and two, they're also just not very willing to speak up and say anything about it. That's not the type of people they are. I'm sure we've all been in situations where there's just some sort of communication mishap or weird passive aggression or someone does something out of line and no one wants to call it out, and it's just super uncomfortable. Well, that's most of this movie, and set against a horror backdrop, I think it makes for a very tense atmosphere. That premise, combined with James Watkins' excellent direction and a simultaneously charming yet disturbed performance from James McAvoy, makes this a pretty unpleasant psychological horror film for most of the runtime, and I mean that in the best way. I will say, I think this gimmick, for lack of a better word, of being consistently agreeable to more and more inappropriate behavior does run its course by the end, but it's not repetitive enough to become grating or anything. This remake actually does a good job of fleshing the characters out more so that we understand why they might react to the ways that they do a bit better, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problem in its entirety. The biggest letdown of this movie for me was the final act. Things were going great the first two acts, but the ending here honestly feels like it's from an entirely different movie, and that movie it's from is extremely generic and predictable. It's not bad necessarily, but it's just an overly familiar way to end a film that, until this point, had felt pretty novel. And as someone who's seen the original, I can't help but feel even more let down considering the end of that film was a true showstopper. The remake's plot is actually very faithful to the originals up until this point, and it's the ending where things really start to diverge, and unfortunately for the remake, the original just outdoes it by a mile here. It's not enough to ruin the movie by any means, but Speak No Evil was headed towards horror greatness, and this ending really kind of brought it back down to earth. I do want to end with some notes on the performances since this is such a character-centric film. I already mentioned how great James McAvoy is and how he's really one of the main reasons why this film works as well as it does. But I also think Mackenzie Davis is really strong here as the mother of the guest family. Her character and performance grounds the film in reality, which is definitely necessary in keeping the story as sympathetic as possible. On the flip side, Scoot McNairy's performance as her husband is noticeably worse from start to finish, and the character itself doesn't do much to redeem him either. He's the best example of this film leaning too far into the pushover gimmick, and the weak performance kinda just makes him even more unlikable than he already is. I do also want to give a shout out to Dan Hoff, though, who plays the mostly mute son of the host family. His character gets more to work with than he did in the original, and I think he does a great job of being sort of creepy, but also a sort of emotional cornerstone for the film. It's a weird middle ground he has to pull off while not being able to speak, and I think he does a super impressive job, especially for such a young kid. As for Aisling Franciosi and Alex West Leffler, who play McAvoy's wife and Davis's daughter respectively, they're both serviceable, but don't really move the needle at all. Overall, the performances do more to help the film than to hurt it, which is a big win considering it really does depend on its characters and their relationships a lot to be effective as a psychological horror film. Overall, Speak No Evil is a really solid horror film and a really solid remake of the 2022 original. It does a great job of maintaining its tension throughout due to some great direction and some really strong performances, as well as a bit more character backstory to really add some weight to this story. Unfortunately, the ending was definitely a letdown for me, but it's nothing too egregious at the end of the day. I'm going to be giving Speak No Evil the same score I'd give the original film, which is a 7 out of 10. If you enjoyed the review, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And if you've seen Speak No Evil already, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.